Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Sarah Nolan. She was appointed Director of Mental Health Services for UHS in July 2020. Prior to her appointment, she had over 10 years of experience and leadership at college and university counseling centers. Before coming to UW, she served as the Assistant Director for Training at the University at Albany's Counsel and Psychological Services, where she was responsible for the administration and daily operations for an American Psychological Association accredited doctoral internship program and doctoral practicum programs. She's here to give a presentation entitled Collective Care, the Future of Wellbeing for Our Campus Community. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Sarah Nolan.
Thank you. Let me just. Wow, you open your computer now and you just have thousands of communications with. Thank you. Is that good? Okay. Well, then I won't tell you what I was about to say because it was not worth it. It was a venting, which is actually a healthy coping strategy. Yeah, you're about to experience a lot of that. So my name is, and just, I will do my best to stay close to this mic. Is this volume? Can folks in the back hear me? Great. And I am going to be doing two things at once here. So I think I can do it actually. So my name is Sarah Nolan. I am the Director of Mental Health Services on campus. I am really excited about that campus tour that was just described because this morning I was like, okay, which union? Don't screw it up. I've never worked in an institution that has multiple unions. This feels like a setup for failure automatically, but I made it. I'm here. It's really good to be here with all of you. So my talk today is going to be on collective care. How many people in the room have heard of the concept of collective care? I just happened to stare at one person I know in the audience who I'm sure is aware of it, but it also looks like a few other people are aware of it too. So collective care is really what I see. It's my vision. And I don't want to suggest that I have coined the term collective care. I do not take responsibility for that or ownership over that. But in my view, it is the way forward out of this mental health situation that we have found ourselves in as a country. And so I really, it's my honor to be the Director of Mental Health on this campus. And it's also an honor to be here with all of you today. I see the mental health of our community, and I'm going to talk both about students, but also about us and our communities beyond students. I see it as our responsibility to work together on this. I'm very honored to manage a large group of mental health clinicians, but we cannot do all the work, and we are not doing all the work. Folks in every corner of this university and this community are doing mental health work all the time, and we need to talk about that and kind of what that means and how we can support that in a real way. I have an identical twin sister, which is relevant, and give me a minute. But she's an identical twin, and she happens to be a stand-up comedian and a comedy writer in LA. And so like childhood issues aside, we can talk about that another time in terms of what it was like to grow up in the shadows of that. She's very successful. So my mom, for the last like 10 years, I've overheard my mom several times say to people, well, my daughters have very similar careers. And I don't have another sister. So it's really interesting to me that she frames it that way. And at first I was sort of like, okay, so you just have absolutely no idea what I do. My dad is like, my daughter's a faculty member at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm like, well, I mean, sure. Which feels closer. But as I've talked to my mom about it, she says, truly, both of you have a vocation and a career built on making people feel good and sort of helping people find the bright side of life and constantly searching for the bright side of humanity. And I really appreciated that. And I happened to be reading a book, and the chapter when I was on the bus this morning was about humor and how it really is, it really addresses pain. Pain is easier, physical and emotional pain can be dealt with humor. And I think that is not lost on me. And my mom is, I guess, just a genius. And we could all share that with her later. I'll share that with her later. But my point is that that's all of us. None of us went into higher ed because we were like, this is a great get rich quick scheme. You know, I mean, like maybe one person on this campus, but none of the rest of us. And so, you know, the fact that we are here alone says that we have built our careers on caring about people and wanting to be around communities where we're focused on the development of young people. And so that says a lot about who you are and how you show up in the world. And so my goal here and on this campus generally, and really why I took this job, is to help all of us understand how we do that together, because we're all struggling. Our whole community is having a hard time with this, and it's not getting easier anytime soon. So let's dive in. So what I plan to do in the next little bit of time with you, and I'm saving some, ideally saving some. Okay. Do I need to point it at something? Oh, there we go. Did I do it? I did it. You did it? Okay, great. So I'm gonna save some time for questions at the end. But let me just run through what I plan to talk about today. So I really want to talk about the state of mental health. We are hearing from every corner of the media about how problematic the state of mental health is, but I would like to give folks some numbers and a clear sort of picture of the landscape of mental health in this country, both in terms of young people and adults. And some adults are also young people. I'll just all of us. And then I'm going to talk about the concept of collective care, which is theoretically based. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in practice and what that could mean for us here at UW-Madison and some ideas that I have. So my hope is that if nothing else, there are three things you take away from this. One is that mental health distress is touching all of us, and it looks really different for each person. And I think we need to sort of, and I try not to use the word need too much, but it's helpful if we center that concept all the time, because the reality is it gives us compassion, it gives us empathy, it helps us understand the way that difficult interactions go, and it just helps us move through the world more easily. It also is very validating and makes it easier to sleep at night to know that you're not alone in your experiences and your family's experiences with mental health distress. I also truly believe we need to think differently than we have historically about how we address well-being in this country. It is broken. And we could say that about the whole healthcare situation, but that's beyond my scope. So mental health is broken in this country, and we can't change that system, but we have a pretty big system here that we can change and affect. And then finally, I truly believe that collective responsibility is at the core of well-being and mental health. We know that above all else, human connection and being connected to other people and feeling like other people see and understand us is very deeply connected to well-being and mental health. So when in sort of describing the state of mental health, I'm going to go through three categories. The CDC, and this is going to feel daunting and depressing. The news isn't great, but we will shift it to a more positive spin once we talk about the realities of what is out there. And I think it's important for us to be honest about the realities. The CDC came out 2 weeks ago with a new report about what's happening to high school students since the pandemic. And for those of you who live with high school students or are connected to high school students, this is going to be unsurprising to you. But they are having a very hard time. And they have been having a harder time with each year anyway. College students, when we talk about college student mental health, we really need to talk about two different populations, the general student population and the clinical population. Both of those populations are struggling. And so we have different ways of understanding kind of what's happening for those populations, but truly, since about 2006, college counseling centers have seen massive surges in people coming in for services. And we can't even really understand the demand because all we can measure is the people we're actually able to fit into our services. So from, I think it was 2009 to 2016, there was an average of a 40% increase in college counseling centers around the country in terms of people coming in. And that was the beginning of the surge, which has just continued. Adults are also struggling. There are certainly differences with regard to age ranges and other identity factors, but across the board, adults are having a harder time than they were. In terms of general mental health outcomes, things were fairly steady for adults before the pandemic, although suicidal ideation rates and suicidal attempt rates were certainly climbing at a steady pace since about 2011. So now I'm going to dive in just a little bit deeper into each of these. If you like graphics and find them helpful, you'll find this helpful. Otherwise, just close your eyes and listen. Not really. So I'm not sure how viewable this is, but I'm just going to walk you through the broad strokes of each of these. So this is from data reported from 2009 to 2019. I wanted to show you this because I think it's important to note that this is not just a pandemic problem. We saw an increase in the deterioration, or we saw a deterioration in mental health among high school students before the pandemic hit. Particularly this first category, persistent feelings of hopelessness and sadness. That already at just above 25% in 2009, that's a pretty significant part of our population. But then that jumped to above 35% by 2019. And in a minute, I'll talk to you about what happened to that after the pandemic. Some of these other numbers are overwhelming when we think about them. Seriously considering a suicide attempt rose to just under 20% by 2018. These kids are struggling. And I do want to say there's a lot being done in our K through 12 communities to address this and to work on this. But jumping about 10 slides, but it is not supported enough by systems. And that's where it's really problematic because this is not a person problem. This is a community and system problem. And then these other factors, making a suicidal plan, attempting suicide, and then being seriously injured by a suicide attempt. So all of them have been increasing over that 10-year period. So what we've seen since the pandemic, and this was data released literally 2 weeks ago by the CDC, is that 37% of high schoolers report poor mental health during COVID. 44 reported persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. And so if we go back to the previous slide, well, that feels risky, but at the previous slide, we went from in 2009, somewhere in around 25%, we jumped about 10% by 2019. And now we have jumped almost another 10% post-pandemic, 2 years into the pandemic. And so that is a very real problem. That is a lot of young people. And those, in addition to us being concerned because those are part of our community, we also need to be prepared as a campus community that this is the next cohort of college students. They are a year away from being our students. And so what are we doing to prepare for that? Prepare ourselves in terms of building ourselves up and creating some kind of stabilizing environment for ourselves that will allow us to get, to support these folks, but also what kinds of programs are we setting up for them as they enter? Some of these additional pieces of data, I just think they're helpful context for what's been happening in homes in the pandemic. The tension levels in the pandemic with financial burdens, job loss, relationship stress, all compacted, particularly when we weren't able to really leave our homes and reach out to other people. And there is not enough access to counseling and other types of healthcare that can help with some of these issues, has really made it very stressful for our high school students. And these are, again, students who will be coming and living in our community and already are living in our community, but with their families. So that's the state with high school students, college students. So I'm going to broad stroke this. This is our overall, this is American College Health Association data, which looks at, it's a very broadly distributed survey across the country. This is not the clinical population. This is the general college student population in our country. This is a really wonderful survey. And actually we're currently, it's implemented every year, and currently it's being implemented on our campus. So by this summer, I don't want to overpromise. I like to underpromise and overdeliver, generally speaking. But by this summer, we should have the data that reflects how our campus is doing to contribute to the American College Health Association data. So that's very exciting for us. But this survey has been implemented since 2000. There are a couple versions of it, so I wanted to be really mindful of not comparing different versions. But if we look from 2008 to 2018, feelings of hopelessness and loneliness increased. But particularly these two middle, or the third and fourth sets of bars are really important to pay attention to. Feeling so depressed that it was difficult to function has climbed to above 40% for college students, reporting on the last 30 days. And then feeling overwhelming anxiety climbed to above 60%. This is the reality of students. Anxiety is skyrocketing for college students across the country. And this is national data, but I will tell you, with every survey, whether we're looking at the general student population or the clinical population, UW-Madison students reflect what's happening out in the country. And so it is really helpful data for us to understand what's happening for folks. The serious consideration of suicide is another big jump. That's about double, from about a little over 5% to a little over 10%. That's very scary. If someone is seriously considering suicide, that puts them at a very high risk. And as a community, we want to understand, how do we help these people feel better? How do we help one another feel better? So this is the data since 2019. And I think, so the survey shifted, they did a different version in 2019. So I just showed us the 2019, 2020, and 2021 here. And this is fall semesters. As you can see, in terms of loneliness, it is not surprising that that continued to rise. It is interesting that some other things leveled out a bit. For some students, there were some protective factors to being in their homes with support systems, with therapists from their community. So some folks who have supportive home situations and have supportive networks at home found 2020 in particular to be a helpful time for them to sort of be more stable. And that is why, that is hypothesized as why there was a reduction in self-injury during that time also, because there were more supports built in. So I did want to give you a little bit of UW-Madison data just to show sort of our trends, but so this is from 2014-15 year to 2020-2021 year. And notably 50% increase between those 6-year periods. And what I really want to point out is from the 17-18 academic year to the 18-19 academic year was the biggest jump. That is also, 18-19 is the last time we were pre-pandemic. And so at that time, college counseling centers were very worried because we are all understaffed and we don't have what we need to be able to take care of the students we already are taking care of, let alone a huge influx. So people were preparing for this big surge. And now that's where we are again, because we're back into in-person interactions. We're back to people being much more likely to come in for counseling. So while UW-Madison, at our counseling center, we've continued to see a rise, we, like many other counseling centers across the country, are expecting a much more significant rise going into the next year. So we are bracing ourselves for that. There were some counseling centers across the country that saw reductions in people coming in the doors during the pandemic. We did not. I have no explanation. I can't really take credit for that. I think we just have students who are aware of our services, and we offered all of our services virtually so that we did have strong access. So I think it's helpful for you all to also know what's bringing people in for therapy at UW-Madison. And again, it aligns with what's happening around the country. Anxiety is the #1 reason people come in for therapy. And it's also the #1 increasing reason people come in for therapy. So preparing, in terms of what we're doing over at Mental Health Services, we are constantly trying to think about ways that we can engage in early intervention and intervention with particular anxiety disorders. There was certainly an increase in social anxiety over the course of the pandemic. And I anticipate with high school students coming into college who have had a very different social experience over the last few years, that we will really need to be nimble, pivot. Those words are like, have really lost their joy for me. But we will need to be nimble in thinking about how we serve creatively and innovatively serve students who are dealing with anxiety. The only other 2 things I'll point out here is that attention concerns rose in 2020 and then have sort of started to drop back a little bit. I really think, I mean, like today, I know that you're all at least mostly paying attention to me. If we were virtual, you would be reading an article, checking your calendar, sending a Teams message to someone, and somebody could even be like coming into your office and talking to you. So we all struggled with attention, particularly in the onset of the pandemic. And so what we experienced at Mental Health Services is a lot of students coming in with self-diagnosed attention disorders. And most of them did not meet the criteria for attention disorders. And so what we've done is gotten creative in terms of programming for people who are having trouble with attention but don't necessarily have attention disorders. And a lot of that involves body movement. So we've been doing programs with Recwell, where we do some psychoed stuff about how to focus your attention, how to minimize your distractions, but also there's a fitness instructor who works through some body movements with them because we know that body movement helps us pay attention. And the other thing is body image and eating concerns rose across the country in this time period in the pandemic. And that is a very dangerous, eating concerns is a very dangerous symptom for college students. So we're really attending to that. So adults. So the data suggested that adults were sort of had maintained, there were pretty even levels of depression and anxiety in our country for adults. The pandemic shifted that. So in June 2020, the data showed that there were 3 times as many people dealing with symptoms of anxiety and 4 times as many people dealing with symptoms of depression as the previous year. And of course, this is extraordinarily relatable. I mean, June 2020 was a time when we had lost so much. We had no idea what was coming next. We didn't know what to do. There was no vaccine in sight. It was all very, it was just out of our control. And it still is, but we've learned a lot about how to manage it all over the last couple of years. What I think is really interesting is the CDC and the US Census Bureau are working together right now on a project. And I'd be happy to send the link out because if you're interested in data, it's fascinating. They have this 20-minute survey. It's a household survey that they send out in phases, 3-week phases, to get real-time data about how people are doing in this country, how adults are doing in this country in terms of anxiety and depression. And symptoms of anxiety and depression, I mean, of course, we're talking about different measures here, so I want to be careful about inferences, but symptoms of anxiety and depression are sticking around. People are still struggling. And I understand that this is not groundbreaking. I don't feel like I'm telling you something you don't know, but I do think the data is really important for us to be aware of because it's not just, we can't minimize it. It is very real, this experience. There are differences in communities. Certainly when we look at age, for example, younger adults are having a harder time than each category of older adults. Explanations for that could be that having a spouse or partner is a protective factor, and financial security is a protective factor. So there are certainly reasons. I also think that as we age, most of us develop certain coping strategies as we experience hard things. And this has come as quite a shock for that group of folks in their 20s in particular. Okay, so I'm going to move on from the data, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what's actually been happening for us and why some of why we feel so heavy around this time period. And to start, there's a video that I love, and it's honestly, it's a bit tangential, but it's like such a good video, and some of you have probably seen it before, and I think it's really helpful for moving us into a conversation about sort of what's happening for us personally. You can tell it.
Very different than sympathy. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar.
You're good. Oh, sure. So this is Brene Brown. For those of you who are familiar with Brene Brown, she's really wonderful and is a social worker in Houston. I was in Houston recently and I was kind of like, you could live anywhere. But I'm no offense if you're from Houston. Let's get the video up.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman
We can give it one more go and then we can just skip it.
And is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
That was worth it. We're good. Real quick on the Houston thing. I'm from New Jersey, and so I have a thick skin when it comes to people making fun of New Jersey, but Houston was a perfectly nice place. And also, I went in early March, and so I really appreciated being able to be outside after coming from Madison. So I show that video because I have watched that video many times over the last couple of years. And I was in a presentation last week where someone showed it, and I wasn't paying attention to the presentation at all. And then she showed this video, and I was like, God, that video is so good. And it really gets at the importance of connection. And there is tons of research, but also tons of personal anecdotal evidence that connection is so healing for us. And so when I think about sort of what do we do about what's happening in the world in terms of mental health distress, where do we begin? Connection just feels so obvious to me. And making sure that we are setting up opportunities for connection, but also creating and envisioning a system that's built around human connection. I also think that when we think about what's happened emotionally over the last couple of years, it is also related to connection, the loss of connection. And so one of the concepts that I want to talk about is ambiguous loss. Has anybody heard about this term? Okay, a few people. We need to be paying attention to this term. So ambiguous loss is, and I'm like, I have my 4th grade English teacher in the back of my mind saying, do not use the word ambiguous in the definition of ambiguous loss. And also, it's very ambiguous. It's loss. It's loss that's ambiguous. It is loss that we can't put a name to. It is, we are grieving and we feel it viscerally, and we don't really understand why. And that is an experience that people of all ages in this country and globally have been having for 2 years. I myself was in a car with a friend earlier this week, and I've been trying to identify why I just feel off. Life feels heavy. And I had this aha moment where it's like, I have a very complicated grief. I moved from New York to Wisconsin in July 2020 after leaving a job that I actually loved, with people I loved in a community that I had. And after having one day in March 2020, just sort of working from home permanently. And so that alone, the March 2020 day, when we all just started working from home, all of a sudden that chapter of our lives ended. And we have not, I mean, some of us, I'm sure in certain spaces have talked about that as a loss and have been able to define that grief. But I think we are still figuring it out, and we're going to be confronted with it as we move into more of this in-person world and as we try to go back to what we used to have, because it's not here anymore. Everything is different. And that's hard. Change is really hard. And so my personal experience of processing that and naming it as grief has been very helpful in terms of understanding that there's not something wrong with me and I don't need to like quit my job and move to the Caribbean, but although that is a helpful plan B, honestly, on hard days. Yesterday I was like, it's finally warm out. Then I woke up this morning and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. You can't even go, like, now it's pouring rain. Okay, here we are. But really naming what's happening for us and from the things that are small things to the things that are major, the loss of life that happened. Even if it wasn't related to COVID, most of us didn't have chances to honor the people we lost over the last 2 years. Death is not easy whenever it happens, and it is always complicated, but having funerals and wakes and Shiva and being able to have some identified period of time where you know people will attend to you and attend to the grief and the loss that happened is really critical to how we operate as human beings. And we haven't had that. A related term is disenfranchised grief, which, and neither of these are new concepts. I just feel like the two people who coined these terms are now like, can definitely retire because now it's like all of us, we're all in this together. This is an experience that is shared communally. And disenfranchised grief is really when we talk about things like our high school kids who didn't get to have their prom and we minimize it, you know, and it's sort of like, well, you know, at least you have, at least you have your family, you know, at least you didn't lose someone. But these are things, you know, when we think about high school kids, the time period that some of them were anticipating and being excited about something like a prom or a homecoming was a huge portion of their like cognitively awake years. And it's incredibly disappointing. And we can't change that fact, but we can certainly create space to let them grieve. And so when I think about us as a campus community, we got to figure that out. We need to create space as a campus that doesn't, and I joked about venting earlier, and venting is truly a healthy coping strategy to a degree and at times. But we need to create space that's not toxic, but that's really helpful to processing what we've lost. And it's different for each of us. And I'm not talking about group therapy necessarily. I'm talking about just opportunities of connection where we are honest about what has happened to us. And that feels really important. Some institutions, now I'm about to get on a soapbox that's actually sort of like, sounds like a pitch for my own promotion, but it's not, so please. But some institutions are naming, you know, high administration level people who are focused on the well-being of their campus. And that is a concept that feels pretty necessary going forward. You know, my role in my office, we really talk about students and we take care of students, and we certainly do a fair amount of consultation with faculty and staff and community members. And there's certainly EAO, which you know, does a wonderful job, but is a small office. But who is really making sure that the system is protecting and taking care of its people? I don't think I'd even want the job, so that's really not a job pitch, but I'd think about it. So another concept that I think all people really need to be paying attention to, because it used to just be something we talked about with caregivers and you know, frontline healthcare workers and mental health clinicians, compassion fatigue. A lot of people pretty easily, when you're struggling, and sort of like what I described for myself last weekend, feel like I'm burnt out. I'm burnt out. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. This job is just too much is being asked of me and I'm not getting anything in return. And that is certainly a reality for some people. But I also think we need to be considering the level of compassion fatigue that's happening for people. People are being asked to do things both in their jobs and in their communities that are very draining and that they may not have historically been doing as regularly. We each have a finite size of cup to pour from. And if we don't have ways of sort of filling up our own cup and making sure that our cup is full before we're asked to pour it into other people to fill up their cups, then we are drained of our ability to have empathy. And that should be named as compassion fatigue. And I would guess that most people in this room have experienced at some point in the last 2 years some level of compassion fatigue. And that is a much easier thing to overcome than burnout. Signs of compassion fatigue are, well, it's going to feel like, yeah, I feel like that's irritability, taking it out on, people that you care about or people that you work closely with, fatigue, waking up in the morning and not wanting to go to work, feeling like you're not good at your job anymore. I think that is one that a lot of people have started to wonder about. The reality of compassion fatigue is that with rest and with filling your own cup back up, whatever that looks like for you, you can overcome that. Burnout is a more chronic and difficult to overcome condition. And so I think it's really important that we as a community are considering what's happening for each of us. Because, and I didn't intend to go to this place, but the workforce we are going to lose people. We are having a hard time hiring people because our jobs look very, very challenging right now. And so in order to actually address that, we do need to identify sort of what is happening. Why are we feeling this way? How are people feeling? And what kinds of systemic changes do we need to make to really improve the situation? So the concept of collective care is, the best definition is that it's institutionalized self-care. It is making a decision that we have responsibility as a collective group of individuals for the well-being of the other people in our community, but also that that we need to work together to make sure that our system institutionalizes and values and prioritizes our well-being through the way that it operates. And I think that a lot of organizations are talking this way, but we've got to get really in the weeds with what that means, because I think it's really easy to say, we care about the people who work here. We want to take care of the people who work here. You can go for a walk on your lunch break. You know what I mean? And that's minimizing. But I think we really need to create some institutional level policies and demonstrations of values and priorities that really fit this model. The notion of collective care is based in activism and it's been around for a long time. It's interesting, the last couple of years, it has become more of a mainstream idea, which I think is really wonderful, but it's based in feminist thinking. And so the idea is like, we are a community, we are responsible for each other, and the system is not something separate. We are the system, and the system needs to take care of us, and we need to do what we need to do as a collective to use our power to shift the system. So a few ideas that I have about collective care and what it could look like at this university, and certainly a few different soapboxes that I have stood on in the last year. So questioning traditional ideas and metrics of productivity. What do we consider to be a success? What are we giving people raises and bonuses for? How are we using the way that we assign value to someone's work? How does that demonstrate a value of collective care and well-being? At UHS, at Mental Health Services, we're moving to 360 evaluations. And I do think that this is one way to demonstrate this. We are not top-down. And of course, 360 evaluations do require a lot of work on the front end. We have a wonderful HR team who is working closely with us to help with this. But the idea is that our counselors, my colleagues, are doing incredible work. And in order to really help them, to help promote the meaning that they have in their jobs and help them understand what incredible impact they're making so that they can continue to sort of feel fed by that, it needs to be more than me telling them, I appreciate the good job you did. You saw this many people. That's great. And I say more than that, but really creating a collaborative environment of feedback giving to help people grow, but also to help people understand what an impact they're making, and outside of our agency and within our agency. institutionalizing well-being programs that are community building and connection building and are not considered extra work. We do a really great job of, lots of organizations do, of creating programming that's something you could add to your day. But if we really prioritize well-being and we really want to take care of our workforce, we need to make sure that we're valuing this and putting it as something that is part of our everyday experience. And that's going to look different for different communities. And I think people need to have conversations about what that looks like. But even like this opportunity, like it feels really good to be connecting with all of you in this space for me. I don't know how it feels for each of you. But, like we're all in this together. And so building collaborative bridges that don't require individuals to consider like, oh, well, I really would like to collaborate with, the counseling center. So let me reach over there. But really, having people in higher power positions create space for folks, for colleagues to have conversations about what do they need and want to build connection across our community. We have a lot of power in collective. And so the more we're talking and connecting, the more of a difference we can make. Humility and leadership and consensus models of decision-making as we make changes to the work environment. So I understand that there needs to be, at the end of the day, someone has to make a decision. And I over at Mental Health Services, I run a large organization, and I get that that's my responsibility, but it has to be based on consensus building conversations. It can't just be my decision. And right now, we've got to be really radically thinking about the way that we bring the workforce back. And having conversations with the people who are working with us is the only way to really figure out what's the best thing for a certain group of staff. So my team, we've been having lunchtime conversations where they are very honest with me about what their needs are. And it is very clear that for my team in particular, having autonomy and independence and having some control of their schedules that allows them to see their young children before they go to bed, that allows them to have some, not have to commute a couple days a week, things that give them more control and help them build that level of control in their lives are really helpful. And so that's what we're doing. We're figuring out one of the things we've done is we've extended the workday Monday through Thursday, not to make people work more, but so that people have flexibility for when they work. So we're open from 8:30 to 7 Monday through Thursday. And I have several staff who stop working mid-afternoon and restart again so they can have quality time with their children that they didn't have before. And that's really helped them. And when we give people a voice in making those decisions, they're not expecting to get everything they ask for, but feeling heard is such a critical part of feeling like you matter and your opinion matters and you want to show up for people that are around you. So part of the collective nature of this is that we are a team. Yeah, I know that I have people on my team who want to work remotely every day of the week. But they also, because they have been listened to and because they understand that we're a team, they appreciate that they do need to come in a couple days a week so that other people can also work remotely a couple days a week. And so making this a collaborative collective decision has been critical. This second note on here is one that this is a hill I'm going to die on. And I understand that I'm not the first person to suggest this at UW-Madison, but when we look at what's happening, and this is really student focused, but when we look at what's happening in the K through 12 schools, health departments, the Wisconsin Health Department is working very hard on a curriculum for secondary education that addresses community building, social responsibility, self-awareness, understanding people who are different than you when you're a kindergartner. And we are not prioritizing that sometimes I speak too freely, but we're not prioritizing that in our curriculum. We don't have required courses on social responsibility. And it doesn't need to be framed that way, but students are 18 typically when they get here. They're not done figuring that out. I mean, none of us are. And so we need to figure that out for ourselves. I do think it would be helpful for us to build programs for faculty and staff around community building, but certainly having required seminars and things that foster community building, because the whole Wisconsin idea, my understanding, and I'm going to screw this up for sure, but my understanding is that this is not just about creating young people who go out into the world who are critical thinkers and challenge each other intellectually. We really want to send people out into the world who are going to make the world a better place. And part of that is social responsibility, being aware of themselves and understanding how to deal with hard things and take care of each other. So I think that the fact that we don't institutionalize that in our curriculum is problematic. This is being recorded. Wow, that was great. That's it. Oh, no, that's not it. One more. I was at a talk yesterday where at the very end, the speaker said, now, one last thing, I want everyone to stand up. And then she said, well, you didn't have to give me a standing ovation. I was like, oh, never can see that one. I said earlier that, you know, the mental health and well-being of our students is clearly not just the responsibility of a counseling center. But what we have not done as good of a job at, and what we need to do better at, is preparing peers, preparing students, and preparing faculty and staff to manage those interactions better. Faculty and staff are confronted daily with students who are in distress, and we are contributing to compassion fatigue and burnout by not giving them the tools to figure out how to manage those situations and keep them in a manageable place before they get them to more kind of pointed mental health assistance. So that's something that I really, and we are starting to work on that across the university, which I'm really excited about. But we've got students, we've got roommates, we've got advisors, we've got people in every corner of this university who, you know, who have situations each day where a student in crisis comes to them and they're taking care of them. And that is wonderful and part of being part of a collective, but also we can't have people doing that as an individual. People need to know that we are here, that folks are here collectively to share that responsibility. I particularly worry about our students who are put in those positions, and they are not equipped to take care of their roommates who are in such high distress. And then finally, collaborating across departments. And so I think an example of this at Mental Health Services this year, we have piloted a program that has been really successful. And it's called the Co-Responder Program with the University Police Department. And in this pilot, whenever we're running the program, when a call comes into the police department from a family member, a community member, or a student in distress, and it is related to mental health, 2 of our clinicians meet the officers at the scene and intervene. And it has been, I mean, I get chills when I just got chills. Like, it is so meaningful to everyone involved, to our student who is the person who is needing the intervention. It is life-altering. All of these people, and every student that we've served in this program so far has been a member of a historically marginalized group on this campus. And they are met with an intervention that gets them connected to help. We have had 100% success rate in getting them connected to help. Additionally, police, our campus police do not want to be doing mental health interventions. They are not trained mental health clinicians, and they don't want to be. And so the collective care of saying, you know, historically, it's like, well, that's the job you got into. You're a first responder, so call us at 9 a.m. when our office opens. You know, that's not really supporting our community. And so thinking about where we need to implement ourselves without burning ourselves out and creating problems for ourselves, but where do we need to share a burden? And then for community members, when somebody calls the police and their family member or their community member is in mental health distress, and what ends up happening is that 2 counselors respond to them and the person gets connected to services, they are far more likely to call for help when somebody is in need again. And so it's an example of something where we have really impacted the community. And I just think there are probably so many more opportunities out there for that kind of work if we shift our thinking a little bit about how we operate on this campus. So that is all. And so I have my, and that is my presentation. I have my contact information up there. I'm happy to share these slides out. But at this point, I'm going to pause and take questions.
So as folks have questions, we'll run mics on either side of the room. So
It's great not to have to look at a chat box.
Sarah, that was wonderful. Question, how can we share information on campus about schools, colleges, divisions that are already doing some of this really good community building? How can we share that so that we're not all recreating the wheel?
I think that's a really great question and part of a larger issue that we seem to experience on this campus of sort of like doing the same thing in multiple spaces when we could be working collaboratively. I do think we need to have a centralized place of who's sort of like overseeing campus well-being and connection. And that involves also defining what we mean by that in terms of like, are we talking about, care practices for faculty and staff? Are we talking about student facing things? So I would think where we would need to start is having a central office. And I'm not sure who that would be to sort of oversee something like that. I don't know if other folks have actually another idea about that. It's a good question. But I think just creating spaces where we can all come together but like topical spaces to talk about just what you're asking would be really helpful.
So I work for the Primate Center, and we, like everyone else, are very short-staffed. And
I can't hear you that well.
oh, sorry, I have to get it closer. I work for the Primate Center, and I am the chair of our Compassion Fatigue Committee. And one of the biggest hurdles that we have is we have a group of people who want to help and who want to find ways and resources to help our staff that are struggling. And there seems to be a stigma around it insofar as the people who we are trying to help sort of see us as these people who are just sitting around during lunchtime meditating while they're working really hard. So it seems like the resources we're trying to provide them are not consumable for them because they feel that they don't have the time to utilize the resources that we're trying to provide. And I want to break that barrier, and I can't figure out, like, that's our, I come up with all these surveys and I'm like, okay, how can we help you? What can we do? And then they're like, we don't have time to take this survey. So like, I would love if there was a resource on campus, like a larger compassion fatigue committee on campus that we could pull resources from would be really helpful, because it's not my specialty, but I want to be empathetic to the people we are trying to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that experience is seen elsewhere. I wonder if, now I'm just off the cuff, but I wonder if EAO and my office could work collaboratively on something like that, because I think what you're describing is just the conversation of even implementation and how to make it how to make it systemic, where it's built into someone's day. And certainly we have spaces, our counselors have spaces, support spaces that we offer weekly that they can either go to or they can use the time as they wish. But I think we probably want to, I actually think EAO, and I'd be happy to reach out to, is Joshua here? Yeah, it's probably busy. But we could work together on creating something like that, some kind of group where we get together and talk about unifying those resources and brainstorming about how to implement in different spaces.
So this is more of a plug than an actual question. We all love the idea of developing the curriculum for the students to help with social responsibility to teach that. But at the same time, I work in HR, so I am intimately aware of how closely the university and employment is tied with the state. Make sure you vote. The state legislature has a lot of power in implementing those programs. There are so many hurdles that only we as constituents in the state of Wisconsin can really overcome. So just my plug, go out and vote last week.
This is a great opportunity. I agree with you, vote. I also think that we need to really help people in political power understand that this is not a political issue, and that caring for the community isn't. And I wonder about the opportunity for that in this pandemic, because it's something that's impacted all of us. And what we see with politicians who sort of don't seem to care about people's feelings is that they don't until it affects their child. And so that's an interesting concept. But I was really struck when I first started here. The Department of Health, folks at the Department of Health reached out to me and asked me to review the curriculum for K through 12. And I was like, this is incredible. And also it's this like group of women working at the Department of Health building it. And what are we doing here as a system? And how is this not something that everybody is so proud of about the state of Wisconsin? It should be it's so critical and it's so high need. So I really, lifting that voice feels really important to me.
Hi, my name is Danielle Harrison Green. I'm with the Extension program here. And I have I guess, an observation and a question. I'm fortunate to be a mom of one of these interesting Gen Zs. And my daughter, who just graduated last year, and I was super excited about her getting a job so I can stop paying her cell phone bill.
Congratulations.
She just quit her job. And she, the reason why is because she felt like, they're not really paying attention to my mental health. And so I'm watching her and her other Gen Z friends talk about their mental health and normalize that conversation, and quitting their jobs and, becoming entrepreneurs or whatever they want to do, as long as they can pay their cell phone bill. But I'm just wondering, with that and the Great Resignation, does that mean that the young people that are coming into the workspace now are coming in a little more well-adjusted because they're normalizing that conversation and they're more aware of that and they're holding their employers more accountable to addressing mental health?
That's a really great question. And I appreciate that you think I could answer it. It's so complicated. I mean, it is so complicated. We see a generation of younger people who are really struggling, but at least they're talking about it. And at least they know that they deserve to be able to talk about it. And that, I think, is the biggest difference. I think we're suddenly going to have a young workforce that some of them were in college when the pandemic happened. And so I don't know that we know what those implications will be. But for your daughter and that particular group of people, I don't know that they're higher functioning, but they are being more honest about it. And so some of us who have taken a lot longer to work through some of our stuff would probably look at some of these folks and say they're going to get to where we are more quickly. But it might be a harder road at this time of their life. We need to normalize therapy for everybody. And I actually think, if I was really going to get on a soapbox that shouldn't be recorded, I think we should be talking about how are we providing therapy. It's impossible to find a therapist. When our students talk about how hard it is to get into MHS, I'm like, have you tried the community? It is impossible to get into the community. And managed care has really harmed our ability, but it has helped in some ways, but it has really harmed our ability to provide services to folks because clinicians aren't getting paid enough money. And so it's not worth it to them to continue to do their roles. There's a lot of problem happening. And I think we need to figure out how are we providing therapeutic support to our staff and encouraging people to talk about it. There's certainly a fine line in terms of showing up too much at work and it becomes something that's not helpful to you. But showing up and talking about it and expecting your workplace to be a place that fosters mental health is like so awesome. I think that's really great. And I hope that that means that they get to where we are more quickly because I'm perfectly well adjusted, is what I mean.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a refreshing talk that you gave. And I have been thinking about this for a while because I had heard that many people are leaving jobs and a high percentage are leaving because they don't like their manager. And I see that on campus and academia all the time. And I wish you could talk to every leader on campus because we put people in positions on campus that don't have the skills to be a good manager. And until you fix that, this is going to cycle through, keep cycling through, especially in the mental health place that we all are in now.
What is your name? I mean, I feel like were you eavesdropping in a conversation I had with my boss last week? I agree. I hope everyone heard that. We hire people, we promote hardworking people, and then we just leave them there. And now they're managing a workforce of people who expect to be taken care of by their managers. And we are blaming young people for not being hard enough workers. We are blaming managers for not managing well. And the reality is we've set everyone up for failure. So what we need to do is be working with, I have met with higher level folks in academic affairs, and they're so burnt out or draining with compassion fatigue that they can't even have the conversation at this point. And so we've also got to be really careful, and I don't mean that as a criticism of them. This is a system issue. We need to be spending the summer talking to people, investing in trainings for people that are not just about how to, do TTC, but also about how to take care of people in an appropriate way in the workforce. And what does that mean? We've got to give, absolutely. Seriously, what is your name?
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap things up just because I want to be mindful of time for the breakout sessions.